Hey, what's up, everybody? Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of our very own fee-only certified financial planners. Please note this podcast is intended for educational purposes and should not be considered financial or investment advice, as we do not know all the variables to one's personal situation when answering a question. Before we jump into today's question, a shout out to our extraordinary YFP financial planning team that makes this segment possible. Your Financial Pharmacist offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. So whether you want to pay off your student loans, make the right investment decisions, or simply build a solid financial plan, we'll help get your income working for you rather than the other way around. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Alex in Pleasanton, California.
Hi, YFP. My name is Alex Barney from Pleasanton, California, and thank you for taking my question. So I am a P4 student, and I'm currently applying for residency. And upon graduation, I am planning to pursue PSLF. That seems to make sense with my career goals and my debt load. So PSLF is my plan for my student loans upon graduation. And my question is as I'm applying for residencies, how can I assess whether an institution qualifies as a PSLF employer or nonprofit? So it's been really easy for me to identify things like the VA or DoD or some of these other government agencies as institutions that would qualify. But otherwise, outside of those, how can you be sure that any given hospital or institution is a qualifying employer for PSLF? I would hate to submit my ECF form and find out that I was making payments and not in a qualifying or working for a qualifying employer. I'd like to catch that mistake before it happens. So just in general, to summarize and make this a little bit more generalizable for your listeners, is how can any person, whether that's a student applying for residency or a pharmacist thinking about a career change, assess their potential employer and ensure that that potential new employer is a qualifying employer for PSLF? So thank you for taking my question. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Alex, for submitting your question to be featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yes, this is the question of like eligibility. We talk about, having the right kinds of loans, working for the right employer, being in the right repayment plan, right amount of payments, et cetera. So what we're really zeroed in here is right employer. So Alex, to your point, pretty straightforward with the government, the VA, Department of Defense, government type employers, but it can get a little cloudy when for any like nonprofits outside of that. So what we're really trying to figure out here is on the employment certification form, specifically section 3, question 10, the question asks, is your employer tax exempt under section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code? So this is what we're trying to figure out. And there are actually sub questions to this that can even make it a little bit cloudier. But for the general rule, what I typically do either for clients or I walk them through this is I look at the IRS website. So I think you can Google, is my employer a nonprofit, and look for the IRS website. And the IRS website, I believe the page is called Tax Exempt Organization Search. So if you go onto this page, I'm looking for the call to action at the bottom. There's a button that says Tax Exempt Organization Search. So you click on that button and then it brings you to a database. And you can search the database by employer name, by employer EIN number. So the EIN is the employer identification number. So think of this kind of like the social security number for a business. That's probably the best thing if you can get the actual employer identification number to figure out if they are tax exempt. Because one of the problems, so I tested this as I was walking through this with Johns Hopkins, there's a ton of organizations that have Johns Hopkins, in the title. So the big thing that you're gonna want to figure out is, what is on your paycheck, like who's actually paying you, because you could also be, part of a subset that isn't necessarily part of the nonprofit arm. So if you can get the EIN number, great. If not, you can go through the name and then kind of parse it that way. So once you go through that, you're going to have a long list of different things, potentially a long list to look at. And you'll see, like when I did Johns Hopkins, the first thing that pops up, there's 38 results. Children's House at Johns Hopkins Hospital. But you go through and there's Johns Hopkins Bayview. So these are all like the different sects of that nonprofit. So you want to click into the one that is actually your employer. And basically from there, what you're looking at is Form 990. So on Form 990, which is the return of an organization exempt from income tax, that is actually where you're going to find what the tax filing status is for that particular entity, that particular employer. So I'm looking at a Form 990 of one of the Johns Hopkins, and in it says tax exempt status, and what's checked off is 501c3. So if you go through that process and it leads you to this down this rabbit hole, and you see 501c3, you're good to go. There's other flavors of 501cs, that the employment certification. So the next question it says is your employer a not-for-profit organization that is not tax exempt under 501c3? So you can be a not-for-profit, but not tax exempt.
Right.
If that is a yes, which again, that's going to be a heavier lift for the employer to tell you, as long as you are not a political organization, a partisan political organization, or a labor union, which is question 12 on the employment certification form for PSLF, you're going to be okay. But that is such a gray area, because you're really going to have to kind of get confirmation from the employer itself. Again, to recap, if you're working for the government, you're good. If you can do this search on the irs.gov website, and we'll have to link some of these links to the show notes, and you can drill down that the employer that is paying you your paycheck is a 501c3 nonprofit, then you could potentially be part of the PSLF forgiveness program. So there is some gray area, but following those particular steps, should put you on the right path.
Yeah, great stuff, Tim. And I think the advice with the EIN, where's your paycheck coming from? And I thought the Hopkins example is a great one, because we do have many pharmacists that might work for larger health systems organizations like Hopkins, where they could have multiple businesses, yes, different EINs. That was a good example to use. And, the other thought that comes to mind, obviously, I think the recommendation you had here is spot on. Also lean on the HR department if there's questions, and not to depend, solely on one person per se, but if there's questions, lean on them to help. And I'm also thinking about, for those that are going through residency, for example, are there other pharmacy residents that are currently there? More often, you may see this with medical residents as well, that might have navigated some of this before and can help answer some questions. Again, get you started, point you in the right direction. I wouldn't talk with one resident medical or pharmacy and leave with that information and feel like you've got everything taken care of, but use the resources that are around you. And I love, by the way, Alex just dropping ECF terminology in her question. Well versed in PSLF. So of course, referring to the employer certification form, and we will link to all of what we mentioned in the show notes. And Alex, as a small thank you for submitting your question, we're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. And to those that are listening, if you'd like to have a question featured on an upcoming episode, please go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP, or shoot us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Have a great rest of your day.